In this review, we're gonna systematically and scientifically test the ins and outs of the Galaxy Watch 6. The focus will be on the health and sport tracking capabilities of this new release from Samsung based on more than 2 weeks of testing, which did result in a few surprises. We will test the heart rate tracking accuracy, sleep stage tracking performance, GPS tracking consistency, and low oxygen saturation detection. Now, as always, I do not want to waste your time, so there are timestamps in the description below so you can easily navigate to those things that matter to you. Let's get started. Hello everyone, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now this will be my first in-depth review of the Galaxy Watch 6, and compared to my initial review a few weeks ago, there were a few surprises now that I have about 4 times more data to work with. Now as always, I'm not gonna bother you by listing the specs of this watch, since you can find those on Samsung's website. The most important things to know are the screen is a bit bigger, the processor is a bit newer, it now uses Bluetooth 5.3 instead of Bluetooth 5.2, and the RAM has increased slightly. Otherwise, the Watch 6 is largely similar to the Watch 5. So instead of going through these specs in detail, we're gonna purely be focusing on independent testing of the performance of this watch, since Samsung did promise improved health tracking. Now, as always, let's start off by looking at the heart rate tracking performance of the Galaxy Watch 6, which I tested during a total of 9 indoor cycling workouts, 18 outdoor cycling workouts, and 8 weightlifting sessions. And this is an overview of how the Galaxy Watch 6 performed during 9 indoor cycling sessions. And we'll test the Galaxy Watch 6 by comparing it against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. Now each dot here is a single heart rate measurement, with along the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Galaxy Watch 6. And if the Galaxy Watch 6 perfectly agrees with the Polar H10, all values should be along this blue diagonal line. And the darker black the color, the more dots that there are in that location. And as you can see, most points are indeed nicely along this blue line. Now there are some points away from it, but generally it looks pretty okay. If the points are below the blue line, it means that the Galaxy Watch 6 detected a too low heart rate. And if they're above it, it means it detected a too high heart rate. And we can see especially here, there's a cluster of points where it detected a too high heart rate. And in these moments, it detected about double the heart rate that it should have. So it detected a heart rate of 150 beats per minute, whereas it should have detected a heart rate of about 75 beats per minute. And we've seen this before with some watches, that they either detect double or half the actual heart rate. But we can take a look at some of the individual training sessions to see how often this actually happens. First, let's take a look at this R value up here, which is the correlation, which is 0.92 in this case. Now the correlation cannot be higher than 1, so 0.92 is pretty good, though it's not amazing. Still, it's probably good enough for most people, but like I said, let's take a look at some of the individual training sessions to see what the patterns actually look like. And here we have the first spinning session I wanted to share with you. Now in blue-green, I plotted my heart rate according to the reference Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Galaxy Watch 6. Now along the horizontal axis we have the clock time, and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. And as you can see, for this indoor cycling session there's a pretty good agreement between the Galaxy Watch and the Polar H10. They generally overlap very well. Only in the dips in my heart rate, when I'm taking a rest in between my intervals, the Galaxy Watch 6 isn't able to pick up those decreases in my heart rate fully. So as you can see, usually my heart rate drops to about 80-85 BPM, and the Galaxy Watch 6 isn't fully able to detect this. Usually it stops at about 100 BPM, detecting the dip in my heart rate. Still, overall, the way the Galaxy Watch 6 tracked my heart rate for this ride is generally good enough for most people. There's also this small artifact right here where it really had trouble picking up on the dip in my heart rate, but still this ride looks quite good. And many rides are actually somewhat like this, though there are a few rides that showed some artifacts. And one of them is this ride right here. Here we see that in the beginning of this ride, where I had a big dip in my heart rate, the Galaxy Watch at some point actually detected an increase in my heart rate. And this is what we actually saw in that overview before. The Galaxy Watch 6 detects a heart rate of about 150 BPM, where in reality my heart rate was closer to 75 BPM. So here it actually detected double my actual heart rate. Now for the rest of the ride, it actually looks pretty good, so somewhat similar to what we saw for the previous session. So overall the tracking is pretty good, but sometimes the dips in my heart rate aren't fully picked up. Still, this artifact is somewhat surprising to me. I would think this would be easy enough for the Galaxy Watch to detect. Now, there was one more ride that had an artifact like this, and that's this ride right here. This one was a bit more messy in general, so I don't know if for some reason it was shifted a bit more on my wrist, but you can see right here that when I was taking a rest in between my intervals, it should have detected a heart rate of about 75, 70 BPM, where in reality it again detected double my heart rate, so about 150 BPM. And also right here it had trouble detecting that dip in my heart rate, and also later in the ride it actually detected a too low heart rate. But this ride looks somewhat messy in general, with more noise also on the peaks in my heart rate, so it could have been that for some reason the watch wasn't optimally positioned on my wrist. I'm not sure what happened here. I always try to be very consistent with the way I put the watches on my wrist, but you know, something can always happen. But these were the only 2 rides out of 9 total that show these artifacts, so some actually looked really good, like this one right here where the overlap is more or less perfect. And then most rides were somewhere in between, where they might show some minor artifacts like right here and right here, where it shows a delay in picking up a change in my heart rate. Still, overall, I expect that most rides look good enough for most people. Alright, that's looking fairly solid so far. However, to get a clearer understanding of how the Galaxy Watch 6 performs, let's put these results into context. Let's compare them against 70 different watches I've previously tested. This way, you can determine if there's possibly a better choice waiting out there for you. And here you can see that overview of how the performance of the Galaxy Watch 6 compares to that of many other watches. Now, the correlation value I was talking about before is the value we'll use for this, and this is displayed along the horizontal axis. And the watches are ordered from worst to best on the vertical axis. So the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its agreement with the ECG device. And here I've highlighted the Galaxy Watch 6 in red, and as you can see, it's somewhere in the middle of all the watches. So it's definitely not performing poorly, but there's also many better devices out there. But let's zoom in a bit because it's quite difficult to read, and that way we can see what watches it is similar to, but also which watches are doing a bit or a lot better. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So I've only plotted the better watches, so those with a correlation of 0.9 or higher right here. And as you can see, the Galaxy Watch 6 in red is super close now to the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic. So they're performing more or less the same, I would say. And this is a bit different from my initial review, where I felt that the Galaxy Watch 6 was doing a bit better than the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic. So I'm not really sure what happened there. It could have just been by chance that the Galaxy Watch 6 did better than the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic in those tests. And now that I have about 4 times more test data, the Galaxy Watch 6 and 6 Classic are performing about the same, which does make sense since they have the same sensor, and they're also performing about the same as the Galaxy Watch 5 Pro, the previous generation. Though interestingly, if we look at the Galaxy Watch 5, so the non-Pro version, the normal Galaxy Watch 5, and the Galaxy Watch 4, both of these seem to be doing significantly better than the Galaxy Watch 6 and the Galaxy Watch 5 Pro, and I'm not sure why this is. Now, of course, this was testing I did in the past with previous firmware versions, but still here they consistently did better than the Galaxy Watch 6 does now. Now, I'm not sure if this is just a fluke and by chance the Galaxy Watch 6 is doing worse in my testing now than the Galaxy Watch 5 and 4 did in my previous testing, or if there was a change in the sensor architecture that I don't know about that did change the results, or if potentially the firmware was updated and this actually resulted in a poorer performance of this sensor. Now, it does quite often happen that with new watches, firmware updates are released over time that really improve the results. We saw that for the Galaxy Watch 4, for instance, but I still find it strange that the Galaxy Watch 6, which as far as I know has more or less the same sensor as the Galaxy Watch 5 and also the Galaxy Watch 4, is performing worse than those watches, even though I would suspect that the same firmware could be used on the Galaxy Watch 6 to track the heart rate. But these are just the data that I have and I want to present them to you. If you have any idea why this could be, or if you have any experience with the Galaxy Watch 6 and also the Galaxy Watch 5 or 4, let us know in the comments below. Now, as regular viewers will know, Apple watches are performing by far the best, and also some selected Huawei watches doing quite well. Now, let's tackle a more challenging activity for this watch to track: outdoor cycling. Cycling outdoors is generally more difficult for a watch to track because of the increased tension on my arms, but also largely because of the increased bumpiness. Let's find out if and how this affected the performance of the Galaxy Watch 6. And here you can see a similar overview plot to before, but now for cycling outside. And again, we want the points to be as close to this blue line as possible. Now, as you can see, most points are still close to the blue line because there's a lot of dark black close to the blue line, but there are a lot more points away from the blue line, especially below it right here. So that means that in these moments, the watch detected a too low heart rate. And we can also see that the correlation dropped from 0.92 for cycling indoors to 0.6 for cycling inside. So that's a very significant drop. But let's take a look at the individual cycling sessions to see what's actually happening here. Now, this is the first individual bike ride I wanted to share with you. I had a total of 18 bike rides where I tested the Galaxy Watch 6, and I will select a few that are somewhat representative of the different patterns I wanted to show with you. So some rides look okay, I would say, like this one right here, where there's a generally okay-ish agreement between the Galaxy Watch 6 in red and the Polar H10 in blue. The Galaxy Watch 6 right here does tend to miss the absolute peaks in my heart rate sometimes. You can see that right here, but also right here, and right here. So there's some delay in it picking up an increase in my heart rate. Still, overall, this doesn't look terrible, but there were also some rides that were much worse, like this one right here, for instance, where it really for most of the ride wasn't able to pick up on the peaks in my heart rate, and it always detected a much too low heart rate. You can see there were many moments I had a really quick increase in my heart rate, and the Galaxy Watch just wasn't able to detect this for this ride. It just kept detecting sort of my baseline heart rate, and it wasn't able to follow along well with the chest strap. And some rides were a bit of a mix between the things we've seen so far, where for the beginning of the ride here, the Galaxy Watch 6 did quite well, but then later it really started to struggle and just kept detecting a too low heart rate. And looking at all the sessions for most rides, the Galaxy Watch 6 just wasn't able to detect my heart rate accurately. You can also see that for this ride right here, where again it detected a much too low heart rate. Some bike rides were a bit better, like this one right here, where for at least half the session it was able to track my heart rate quite accurately. Still though, it showed some artifacts in the middle right here. So based on my results and how it performed on me, I cannot recommend the Galaxy Watch 6 for biking outside. This is a bit of a difference compared to my initial review, where I had a limited set of tests that I did, where it did seem to perform a little bit better than the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic, where for my latest testing, I don't feel like the Galaxy Watch 6 is doing any better than the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic. But let's now compare the performance of the Galaxy Watch 6 that have many of the other watches I've tested in the past to see how good or bad this result actually is. And here we have a similar overview to before, but now for cycling outside. And again, the further to the right and the higher devices, the better is its agreement with the ECG chest strap. And the Galaxy Watch 6 marked in red here isn't doing that great compared to other devices. It's actually really close to the Galaxy Watch 5 Pro and also quite close to the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic I tested last week. Now there is a slight difference between the two, with the Classic performing slightly better than the normal version of the Galaxy Watch 6, but I suspect this is random variation and not actual improvement in the performance. Though interestingly again, the Galaxy Watch 4 and the Galaxy Watch 5 are doing better than the Galaxy Watch 6, so I'm not sure what's going on here. Again, this could be by random chance that for some reason while I was testing the Galaxy Watch 4 and 5, the circumstances were just a bit better than for the Galaxy Watch 6. It could have been due to, for instance, sweating versus non-sweating. I tested the Galaxy Watch 6 on quite warm days, though there are plenty of devices I tested on warm days, like for instance the Huawei Band 8 that did quite well. Now, as regular viewers will know, Apple Watches are performing the best by far out of any devices out there. I know some of you think I'm an Apple fanboy, but these are just the data and I'm presenting them to you. You can draw your own conclusions from this. Also, some Huawei watches are doing quite well, like the Huawei Watch GT3 Pro. And we also see that some cheaper watches, like the Huawei Band 8, are doing quite well and a lot better than some more expensive watches. Next, let's take a look at another difficult exercise for a watch to track: weightlifting. Now, for weightlifting, it's not the movement per se that makes it difficult to track your heart rate, but it's more difficult because of the increased tension on my wrist and on my arm, making it much harder for the watch to get a clean heart rate signal. However, first, a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. Of course, you would also make me really happy and it would help my efforts if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. But of course, this is totally up to you. Now, enough self-promotion. Let's take a look at the performance during weightlifting, which I tested during a total of 8 training sessions. Now again, this is a similar overview plot and we still want those points to be as close to the blue line as possible. And as you can see, there is a lot of dark black here close to the blue line, so that's good. So especially here in the lower heart rate range, the Polar H10 and the Galaxy Watch agree very well. But in the higher heart rate range, there's a lot more deviation. We see some points above it and also below it. So that's somewhat surprising since most watches only detect a too low heart rate during weightlifting, where the moment I'm doing a set of exercises, my heart rate increases, but due to the tension on my arm, it cannot detect this. So in those moments, it would actually detect a too low heart rate. So it would keep detecting that low heart rate when I'm in between sets. But in this case, for some reason, it also quite often detects a too high heart rate. And the correlation is also not amazing at 0.73. But let's take a look at the individual training sessions to see why it's also detecting a too high heart rate. In total, I did 8 weightlifting sessions with the Galaxy Watch 6, and here we have the first result I wanted to share with you. And this session shows how it sometimes detects a too high heart rate. So again, we have the Galaxy Watch 6 in red, and here in the beginning, it actually detects a bit of a too high heart rate when I'm weightlifting. Later on, it does appear to be performing okay, but here it struggles a bit. But for most of the sessions, we actually see patterns we see for many smartwatches, where the moment I do a set of exercises, my heart rate increases, as you can see in blue-green for the reference device. So you can see in red that in most cases, the Galaxy Watch 6 wasn't able to track these peaks in my heart rate. And sometimes when I was taking a rest in between my sets, as you can see right here, but also right here, the Galaxy Watch 6 again detected a too high heart rate. And this is not that typical for smartwatches. Now for a few sessions, we see that the Galaxy Watch 6 is sometimes able to detect a peak in my heart rate, for instance right here and right here, but overall still many peaks are missed, and sometimes it also overshoots the peaks, as you can see right here and also right here and right here, where it wasn't able to pick up on the dip in my heart rate. So overall for weightlifting, I cannot recommend the Galaxy Watch 6, but the same is true for many other watches. But to show you how other watches performed for weightlifting, let's take a look at an overview where I compare many of the watches I've tested in the past to the Galaxy Watch 6. And again, this is a similar overview to before, but now for weightlifting, with the further to the right and the higher devices, the better is its performance. And as you can see, the Galaxy Watch 6 is somewhere in the middle of all devices. It's not terrible, like for instance some Amazfit devices, but also not great like the Apple Watches and some selected Huawei watches. Now based on this, it looks like the Galaxy Watch 6 is mediocre compared to other watches. And again, we see, at least in my testing, it's super close to the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic, which makes sense as they have the same sensor and also use the same firmware. We actually see that for weightlifting in this case, they're doing better than the Galaxy Watch 4 and the Galaxy Watch 5. So that's somewhat surprising to me that for this exercise, they do seem to be outperforming the Galaxy Watch 4 and 5. Whereas for the other exercises, they were doing significantly worse. Now this for me could be an indication that there have been firmware changes and that these firmware changes were actually detrimental to some exercises, but maybe slightly beneficial to other exercises. But I'm actually retesting the Galaxy Watch 5 now in conjunction with the Galaxy Watch 6 to see if there's any difference between the two, or if now with the latest firmware they're performing about the same, and this has led to a decrease in performance for certain exercises and a slight increase for weightlifting. But those results I will share in a future video since I'm still gathering the data. Still, honestly, for weightlifting it doesn't matter too much because both the Galaxy Watch 6, Galaxy Watch 5 and 4, all of them aren't doing good enough to be used for heart rate tracking, at least not during weightlifting. I would only use devices with a correlation of at least 0.9, preferably close to 0.95 for tracking my heart rate during weightlifting. And if you really think it's important to track your heart rate during weightlifting, just wear an ECG chest strap. That is generally the most reliable way to track your heart rate. So in general, the Galaxy Watch 6 seems to be an okay heart rate monitor, but it has some major issues. It tends to work well enough for indoor cycling, at least on me, and I think this level of performance would be good enough for most people. However, I expect most people will not be satisfied with the outdoor cycling performance I observed. Its performance during weightlifting also wasn't that impressive, but this might have been expected since most watches suffer performance issues while weightlifting. On the whole, I'd rate the heart rate tracking performance of the Galaxy Watch 6 at 3 out of 5 stars. It works decently enough, but only for static exercises like indoor cycling. But okay, let's switch gears and delve into another health tracking feature, sleep stage monitoring. In their release video, Samsung actually claims they have significantly stepped up their game in sleep tracking on the Galaxy Watch 6 and 6 Classic. But as I indicated earlier in my previous videos, I'm afraid that this improvement mainly touches upon the data presentation and not on the actual sleep stage monitoring itself. And I do find this slightly concerning, honestly, because any sleep advice provided by a watch based on inaccurate data may be detrimental instead of helpful. But this means it's time to take a closer look. To check if the Galaxy Watch 6 can detect my sleep stages, I'll compare it to an EEG device called the Dream 2 that can actually measure my brainwaves and has been shown to be relatively reliable at sleep stage tracking. And here I show an overview of the sleep test results. Now for getting an overall impression of how well the Galaxy Watch 6 performs, the Dream 2 should likely be good enough. However, the gold standard would be polysomnography, which I did try on the Galaxy Watch 6, but I still need to analyze those results. And I also tested that on the Galaxy Watch 5, and you can find that video right here. Now on top here are the sleep stages as recorded by the EEG device, and on the left are the sleep stages as recorded by the Galaxy Watch 6. I wore both the EEG device and the Galaxy Watch 6 to bed for 8 nights, and we will see how close the predictions of the Galaxy Watch 6 are to those of the EEG device. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 was predicted as the sleep stage by the Galaxy Watch 6. And if they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. Now first of all, we see that only 34% of what the EEG device detected as deep sleep was also detected as a deep sleep by the Galaxy Watch 6. So this is a really low number. It actually detected more of what the EEG device detected as deep sleep as light sleep instead, at about 54%. But let's now take a look at some of the individual nights so we can maybe understand better what's happening. And here you can see the first night I wanted to share with you. Now on top we have the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 EEG headband, with along the horizontal axis the time and my sleep stages along the vertical axis. And on the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Galaxy Watch 6. And now in purple right here, I highlighted the deep sleep as recorded by the EEG device. And as you can see, there's a marginal agreement between the EEG device and the Galaxy Watch 6. So some of the deep sleep that the Dream 2 EEG headband detected was also detected by the Galaxy Watch, but only about half of it right here, I would say. And the Galaxy Watch also detected some other deep sleep right here and right here. And it didn't detect this short deep sleep segment right here. So I would say this isn't looking that great. And for this second night right here, we even see worse agreement. Now, first of all, it took a while for the Galaxy Watch 6 to actually detect I'd fallen asleep. So I'd likely fallen asleep right here roughly, but it took about 15 minutes more for the Galaxy Watch 6 to detect this. And it detected a lot of awake time here in the beginning where I actually had some deep sleep. So none of the deep sleep detected by the EEG device overlaps with the Galaxy Watch 6. So that isn't looking too good, and it even detects some awake time during these moments. Now this somewhat matches with what we saw for the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic, which also seemed to be very sensitive and detected too little deep sleep and too many awake moments. Now again, we see something similar for this night right here, where the Galaxy Watch 6 detected very little deep sleep and many awake moments. Though in this case, the moment it did detect deep sleep, it overlapped quite okay with the EEG device. It just detected too little of it. Now light sleep agreement was okay, I would say, at 67%. So 67% of what the EEG device said was light sleep was also detected as light sleep by the Galaxy Watch 6. However, also about 20% was detected as REM sleep instead, and about 11% as awake time. Now, REM sleep agreement was also pretty poor, so similar to deep sleep agreement at about 37%. More of what was REM sleep according to the EEG device was actually detected as being light sleep instead, so also very similar to what we saw for deep sleep. Now, this is a similar plot to before, but now with the REM sleep as recorded by the EEG device marked in red. And as you can see, there's a pretty poor overlap between the EEG device and the Galaxy Watch 6. So as you can see, I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4 REM sleep segments with some light sleep in between. And as you can see, the Galaxy Watch 6 basically detected none of this. It detected some REM sleep right in between these two segments right here. And it only detected a little, really a tiny bit of REM sleep when I was actually having REM sleep according to the EEG device. So you see a little bit of overlap right here and some overlap right here. But generally, the REM sleep detected by the Galaxy Watch 6 is very different from the EEG device. At least that's what we see for this night. Now for this second night, it agrees a bit better. So again, I had 1, 2, 3, 4 REM sleep segments, and the Galaxy Watch 6 detected 3 out of 4 of these. So that is pretty okay, though it did miss this first short REM sleep segment right here and detected some extra REM sleep right here. Though overall for this night, it looks okay. Though for other nights, again, it looks pretty bad, as we also see for this night right here, where there's very little overlap except for this last segment right here. And also the first night we were looking at was pretty bad. And that also means that in most cases, the Galaxy Watch 6 cannot detect your sleep cycles. So you go through roughly 4 to 6 sleep cycles each night, each one starting with light sleep and deep sleep marked here in blue, and each one ending in REM sleep marked here in red. Now, as you can see, I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4 sleep cycles this night, and the Galaxy Watch wasn't able to detect any of these. Now, as I mentioned before, the second night I shared with you looked a lot better, and it would have been able to detect 3 out of 4 cycles, so it's a bit hit and miss, though for most nights it doesn't look very promising. Now, awake time detection is okay, similar to light sleep agreement at about 69%. And again, similar to light sleep, most confusion is with REM sleep at about 19%. But there's also a significant percentage of what was awake time according to the EEG device being detected as light sleep instead by the Galaxy Watch 6. But again, let's take a look at some of the individual nights to see what's actually happening here. This is a similar plot, but now with the awake time as detected by the EEG device in green. And as you can see, there's a pretty poor agreement between the Galaxy Watch 6 and the Dream 2 EEG headband. The Dream 2 detected a few awake moments, so one right here and one right here, and the Galaxy Watch 6 detected none of these. Also, the Galaxy Watch 6 detected me as falling asleep later and waking up sooner, and also detected a bunch of extra awake moments during the night. So this doesn't look very promising, at least not for this night, but we generally see something similar for most nights, where the Galaxy Watch 6 detects a bunch of extra awake moments and also doesn't fully agree on the moment I fell asleep and the moment I woke up. Alright, that doesn't seem too impressive, but let's give it a fair shot by stacking up the Galaxy Watch 6 against a lot of the other devices I've tested previously. Now this graph shows you an overview of the agreement of different watches with the EEG device. Along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the 4 individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. So the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. Now the watches marked in blue right here were actually tested against the polysomnography device, which is actually the gold standard of sleep stage tracking. And the devices not marked in blue were tested against the EEG device we were just looking at. And I would say that generally the conclusions drawn based on the EEG device and those based on the polysomnography device actually give very similar results. And as the regular viewers will know, the devices with the best agreement so far were different Apple Watches, in this case the Series 7, Series 8, but also the Apple Watch SE and the Apple Watch Ultra. The 8 Sleep Pod 3 also performed very well, and other good devices include different Fitbits, Whoop straps, the Google Pixel Watch and the Withings Sleep Analyzer, though their agreement is not quite as good as that of the Apple Watches. And if I now plot the results of the Samsung Galaxy Watch 6 in the same plot, we can see it's not doing that great. It's actually very close to the Galaxy Watch 5, Galaxy Watch 4 Classic, Galaxy Watch 4, Galaxy Watch 5 Pro, and Galaxy Watch 6 Classic. So all Galaxy Watches are more or less the same area of the plot, so I suspect they use the same algorithm and their sleep tracking performance is about the same. Samsung does a bit better than Huawei watches, for instance, but still overall they're not doing that well. Therefore, at the moment at least, I cannot really recommend Galaxy watches for sleep stage tracking. As you might have seen in their release video of the Galaxy Watch 6 and 6 Classic, Samsung did refocus on sleep tracking, though I don't think they changed their algorithm any. I do think they changed the way they present the data to you and how interpretable it is, but if the underlying data isn't any good, I cannot really recommend you use the Samsung Galaxy Watch 6 or 6 Classic for that matter for sleep stage tracking. I think the only thing it's good for at the moment is roughly knowing when you fell asleep and when you woke up, so you can keep yourself accountable for getting enough sleep opportunity. Alright, well this honestly aligns a bit with my general expectations. The sleep stage monitoring of the Galaxy Watch 6 just isn't good enough, at least not on me. Therefore overall my rating of the Galaxy Watch 6's sleep stage monitoring would be 2 or maybe 2.5 out of 5 stars. But moving on, let's now turn our focus to a feature which could help some of you discover they have a sleep disorder you might not even know you had. I'm of course talking about the oxygen saturation measurements taken by the Galaxy Watch. Low oxygen saturation is a common occurrence in sleep apnea, which is a disorder where you basically stop breathing for parts of the night, which could potentially be diagnosed with the watch's oxygen saturation measurements, because as you stop breathing, your oxygen saturation drops. Now, where heart rate is generally recorded using green light, red and infrared light are generally used to track your oxygen saturation. And I wanted to find out if the Galaxy Watch 6 can detect a lowered oxygen saturation. Now, to test that, I took the watch with me on an airplane flight. In the plane, the air pressure in the cabin is decreased during the flight, which effectively lowers the oxygen concentration, which then in turn lowers the oxygen concentration of my red blood cells. And here in pink, you can see plotted how my oxygen saturation roughly varied during the flight. Now the reference device I used for this wasn't perfect, so this is a ring that measures my oxygen saturation, which is pretty good, but it did work during the flight, so I typed a bit, and that can influence the measurements. But still we can see I had a higher oxygen saturation before takeoff, and as the plane ascended, my oxygen saturation decreased. It stayed more or less low during the flight right here. There were some peaks right here, which are probably due to movement of my finger. Then as the plane descended again, my oxygen saturation increased and it stayed at normal levels after we landed. So let's now take a look at how the Galaxy Watch 6 performed. And the measurements I took with the Galaxy Watch 6 are plotted as green dots right here, connected also by green lines. And as you can see, the patterns match very well with the reference EEG device. So there are more or less normal values at ground level that decreased as the plane was ascending. They stayed low during the flight, so much lower than you would expect at normal levels, so at about 93% or lower. And as the plane ascended again, they increased and they were at their highest when the plane was back at ground level. So this actually looks quite good, and the Galaxy Watch 6 performed very well in this testing. Now there will be some variation. We saw last week that the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic showed similar patterns with a bit more noise, and since they have the same sensor, this might have been due to me wearing it on a different arm, or maybe the fit was a bit worse. Still, overall, I do think that with both the Galaxy Watch 6 and 6 Classic, you would be able to detect significant drops in oxygen saturation. Though again, if you get a single low measurement or even a few, there's no need to panic. This is not a medical device, but it could be a reason, if this is something you see consistently during the night, for instance, to get checked by a doctor and see if you potentially have sleep apnea. And as always, I cannot give you actual medical advice. This is just a YouTube video. If you have any issues, please discuss them with your doctor. Okay, this looks quite good actually. Now do keep in mind that this is only a preliminary test, but the results so far are encouraging. Therefore, I'd rate the oxygen saturation measurements of the Galaxy Watch 6 with 4 out of 5 stars. Moving on, let's now explore a feature of the Galaxy Watch 6 that is likely utilized by many users, the GPS or location tracking. We'll test this feature by cycling the same route multiple times, checking if the signals overlap well, which would be a good sign, or if we actually spot significant divergences between the recorded signals, which would be a bad sign. And here you can see the results for 9 times I cycled to work. Now I didn't give the Galaxy Watch 6 any extra time to acquire the signal, so I immediately started cycling, and I always started my exercise on the corner right here. And as you can see, it did acquire the signal quite quickly, so most points are quite close to this corner right here, but they are a bit spread out, meaning that the signal wasn't super accurate in the beginning. So that's both good and bad. Some watches take a bit of time to acquire the signal, but the Galaxy Watch 6 didn't need that time, but the accuracy or sort of the precision of that signal wasn't very good in the beginning. Still, overall, I do think it's really good that it acquired the signal so quickly, and let's now see if for the rest of the rides the results were very consistent, so the signals overlap very well, or if there's a lot of deviation and a lot of noise in the signal. So we actually need to zoom out a bit to look at that better, and as you can see, most of the time I took the exact same route. One time I needed to make a small detour, but then quickly went back on track. And as you can see in the beginning, there's quite some deviation between the signals. Sometimes they're quite close together, but for instance, this signal right here is deviating quite a bit from the others. Then later in the ride, some parts look quite good, as you can see right here. There are also some parts where it struggles quite a bit, so the signals are deviating a bit more again. And as we go along the ride, we see there are some regions where it's performing quite well and some regions where it's deviating a bit more. So again, here the signals come together for a bit, but then for instance here and also here do we see quite a bit more deviation. Then as we go further along the ride, we see that the signals get a bit more consistent, especially here it doesn't look too bad. And if we zoom out a bit, we can see that even better. So here the signals are overlapping quite okay. I would say that the signal quality here is acceptable. And if we zoom into this corner right here, where I know that I take quite a straight angle at this corner, there is a bit of smoothing right here and some deviation between the signals. Still, overall, it does track where I cycled roughly, but we can also see that quite often when I had to stop in front of a traffic light, the signal starts to deviate a bit in place. So you can see some signals right here go a bit to the left, some a bit to the right, but it's not very precise at keeping that signal at exactly the right spot. And later on, we see some more deviations between the signals, especially here it's deviating quite a bit. So overall, even though it roughly tracks your location and you get a rough estimate of where you cycled, I don't think the precise locations are very accurate. And also the total distance that I cycled might vary quite a bit because of this noise in the signal. But let's take a look at some more rides where I cycled from work back home and see if the signal quality is a bit better in that case. And those results are displayed right here. So these are 7 times I cycled back from work, and I always start my workout right here in front of the building. And you can see 5 times it acquired the signal almost instantly, though with some deviation, and 2 times it took a little bit of time, but this cannot have been more than 15 seconds or so. So this is quite good. So again, the signal is acquired quite quickly, though there is quite a bit of noise in the signal, especially in the beginning. And if we then look at the consistency between the signals, we see more or less the same thing as we saw before, though it might look a little bit better because I think cycling back from work, it has a bit of an easier job, so there's fewer interference of buildings around. But let's take a look. So in the beginning here, it actually looks quite good. And this is what we see for many watches, that in the beginning here is easier to track. Then if we go a bit along the route right here, we see there's quite some deviation. So here it almost never tracks me as going exactly along the street. It actually has me going through some buildings as well. So the signal quality here, I would say, is not that great. And especially right here, we see a big deviation between the signals. 3 times it really went off track. So one signal right here, one right here, and also one right here. Then as we cycle a bit further along the ride, it looks a bit worse than I expected, honestly. So there's quite some deviation again here. Then for this part, it maybe looks a bit better. So it's more or less following the street layout now, and also the signals are more consistent. But then again, here we see a bit more deviation. And also right here, twice I had to stop to go into a building. It might have been McDonald's, but as you can see, then there's a big deviation in the signal. But this makes sense, of course, because I go into a building, so I cannot fault it for that. Luckily, after that, it does acquire the signal quite quickly again. Though overall, I would say that the signals are quite noisy. We can also see that right here and right here, that the signals just aren't super consistent. You roughly can see where you cycled, but it's not really following the street layout, which could of course be a systematic error in Google Maps, that there's a slight deviation from the GPS positioning of any watch. But we also see that there's a big deviation between the signals. So many watches do a lot better than this. For instance, Apple and especially Garmin are a lot better at tracking my route. So long story short, the Galaxy Watch 6 doesn't offer the most impressive location or GPS tracking. The signal is quite noisy, and the main thing that it has going for it is that it acquires the signal quite quickly. This means it's good enough for people just wanting to casually map their route. However, it's not good enough for anyone looking to have an accurate record of their bike ride. Therefore, overall, I'd rate it at 3.5 or maybe even 3 out of 5 stars, since the results are even a bit worse compared to what we saw for the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic last week, though I do expect this to be random variation given the similarities between the watches. Now, before I dive into my overall conclusions of this watch, it's crucial to mention some of the limitations regarding my testing methods. Firstly, I must note I could only test the watch on me, and it might perform differently on some people. Factors such as your skin color, gender, the hairiness of your arms, and even whether you have tattoos on your wrist could potentially influence the performance. Still, I do believe my testing gives you a general impression of the watch's performance, but keep in mind that there could be some variation from person to person. Also, more extensive testing and future updates could influence the performance of this watch, as we saw for the Galaxy Watch 4 for instance. But alright, what is my final verdict? Well, it's not that different from my impressions of the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic I reviewed a week ago. In terms of health and sports monitoring, the Galaxy Watch 6 seems to be an overall average performer. It manages to track my heart rate well enough, but only under easy conditions, and it's not good enough for those tougher circumstances. The oxygen saturation measurements were actually pretty good, and the GPS tracking was good enough as long as you don't care about any of those details. On the other hand, the sleep stage monitoring wasn't impressive, very often recording way too much awake time and limited deep sleep. Therefore, to sum it up, I would rate the Galaxy Watch 6 at 3 out of 5 stars. Now, I know I'm repeating myself a bit, but the main thing that bugs me personally is the lack of improvements compared to the previous generations. Yes, the screen is a bit bigger now and some other specs show improvements, but the actual health and sports tracking don't seem to have improved much and potentially even got a tiny bit worse, though I do want to do more testing to be sure of that. Therefore, if I wanted to get value for my money, I would look at a good deal on the Galaxy Watch 5, which potentially offers more bang for your buck. Now, if you do decide to get a Galaxy Watch 5, a Galaxy Watch 6, a Whoop strap, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, and at the same time you want to support this channel, there are different affiliate and non-affiliate links in the description below. They do not cost you any extra, and some even provide a discount. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Galaxy Watch 6, you might also be interested in some other Galaxy Watch testing, and you can find those videos right here. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and catch you in the next video.